Do you go by Joe or Joseph?
Joseph.
Joseph
Thank
Alexander.
you. Yes, ma'am.
Joseph, the founder and CEO of the Uptown Agency. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
We finally meet.
Absolutely. It's nice to meet you. I've been following you on LinkedIn, and every time I go to the store and have an avocado, I think of Yvonne.
Yeah, I'm attached forever. So, what a cool name. I love the name of your agency.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to hear a little bit about his story because it's super interesting, something that happens to me. I have been following you as well, and I thought that you have like a 1,000 people agency based on what you project. The perception is everything, right? And then you are a large agency and you have grew a lot within the past, few years. But I want to know, like, how did you started? And you come from the finance world.
Yeah.
So what brought you to marketing and advertising? And one of the, honestly, the coolest agency is in town because I'm seeing everything because you give us a window to see everything that you're doing inside your agency.
Yeah. No, no, I appreciate the compliment. My life since I was very, very little, it's always been about reinvention. And it's always been about trying to understand, where I wanted to go as a person, and then trying to understand what are the steps that I would then take to go achieve XYZ or go meet XYZ person. And I think I look at our business and my career and the careers of the people that work for us at the Uptown Agency in a similar vein, right? We have very big, ambitious goals at the Uptown Agency, and we're always trying to understand what's going to take us to the next level, right? And so, like you said, I started my career in finance. It's interesting, in college, I studied alternative asset management, and my dream was to go become the next big private equity venture capital person, right? So, I read every single book I could ever find on private equity, mergers, takeovers, the RJR, Nabisco, Barbarians at the Gate books. And I fell in love with, how do you actually then take capital, leverage that capital to then go acquire organizations and then, make those organizations grow. And so I started my career working for JP Morgan Chase. And what I did at JP Morgan Chase was really more high asset net worth, management for individuals. And during that time, I really fell in love with building relationships with people. And I think they taught us a lot about how to build relationships with people. And the biggest thing that I learned at that time was, how do you actually relate to someone? How do you actually take the time to get to know them?
Would you say
right?
they taught you that at Chase? Okay, super interesting. And by the way, let me clarify, because we talk about agencies because we are in the advertising world, but we're talking about advertising agencies. So you come from the venture capital world, and you end up with the cool agency in Dallas.
Yeah, so this is actually a really interesting story. So when I was it was a group called Naya Ventures that I started with. And, Naya Ventures had raised their first fund, mainly aimed at like early stage technology companies. And we had no one really looking at digital marketing or brand strategy or how are we generating leads for these B2B organizations. And that was something that I was keenly interested in at the time. We had great founders that we had wrote, $1 to $3 million checks into so that they could then go start these technology companies or build out their platforms. And all these founders were really brilliant technologists, right? And the interesting thing about them was they made the mistake, I think, that most founders always make, which is they want to talk about their technology.
Right.
They want to talk about the features of the product, right? And if you know anything about building a brand, which you absolutely do, you know that there's a different level of connection that has to be made with a consumer or an end buyer or a B2B customer or a direct-to-consumer customer for them to make the emotion, or for them to have the emotional drive to make a decision, right? Because we don't make logical decisions, right?
95% of the decisions we make are made by the unconscious part of the brain.
Exactly, right? Like our whole lives, it's just this gut instinct that's driving us based on these different marks of familiarity that say, okay, this is something I can trust. This is something that's exciting. This gives me the transformation that I'm looking for. And so I went out, so I'm at this fund, right? And I went out and I bought like 50 books on brand strategy. And I read them all. I took a digital certificate from, Kellogg Northwestern. I started looking about, PPC ads. How do I run Facebook ads? And this is all like 15 years ago, right? And I fell in love with it. And so I started setting up some very, very rudimentary, like, base level campaigns. We had some great successes. The fund had some great exits. And the fund is now called Dallas Venture Capital, and they're doing very, very well. But after, about 2017, I said, I really want to work for myself. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And at the time, all of the folks inside of the fund, they all wanted to go build the next big disruptive technology. Mm-hmm. And I was always more of like the Warren Buffett type of mind, where I was thinking, I want to do something that I really understand, that I know, that I love. I didn't want to wade into waters where I had no expertise. And over the last 4 years, I had been basically kind of sharpening this tool set around digital marketing, around brand strategy, about copywriting. How do you do great design for clients at the time, which were portfolio companies. And so in 2017, I started the Uptown Agency in my studio apartment in Dallas. It was, just me. And I remember we had our first clients. They'd come in. We had a couple lights and a camera. And we started with B2B marketing videos, kind of similar content like this.
So you were doing B2B marketing videos in 2017, when it was like not even that huge trend of videos and podcasts and all that. So pretty much you were like ahead of your time.
Well, it was really fascinating is, in 2017, those were the days on LinkedIn when people didn't want to connect with you unless they knew you. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I really know this person. I don't want to connect. Now LinkedIn is just, flooded with, everybody's connected with everybody. It's the next social kind of platform.
And I think that is pretty much, every platform. Like before, you kind of, you limited your connections. It was very, very exclusive about the connections you made, whether it was Instagram or Facebook or whatever. And right now, it's all about communities. Totally. I feel that I feel identified with that community, then I want to be part of that community. I'm going to follow the leader or the leaders of that community, which is very different. And I love the way you do LinkedIn because it's very modern. Yeah. It's super interesting to me. But let's continue your story. But I want to hone in why do you think that you have this natural instinct to understand marketing and branding, if that's not the foundation of your formal education?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that some of the most talented people in the advertising space, whether that's brand identity design, whether it's copywriting, whether it's video production, a lot of these folks are not formally trained, and I would say it's, the whole adage where, I went to school for XYZ and then I did something else.
Yeah.
I've always been very interested in what made people tick. Mm-hmm. I think I've always thought very deeply about life, and the decisions that I was making and the things that I was experiencing and trying to make sense of it all.
Like a focus group of one.
To a degree, yeah. Yeah, well said. And so for me, when I was very young, I was a songwriter. I wanted to be the next John Mayer.
Oh, wow.
Obviously, I'm not. But so when I started actually diving into creative work and brand building work, I started to realize that there was a connection between, obviously, we all talk about data and how data is very important, right? But there's got to be this emotional, you feel something in your skin, right? What do they call it? The pins and needles on your skin or whatnot, right? When you feel something. Yeah. And that is what you're searching for, right? And you can leverage data to help you understand what is going to make someone make a move, right? Mm-hmm. But what we're looking for is that emotional decision-making factor. And that was something I love. Mm-hmm. I love emotion. I'm a very emotional guy. Ask my wife, I cry during the movies. Probably a lot more than she does. That's awesome. And so it's the study of life, right? And I think we have a lot of books around brand positioning and brand strategy where we're basically saying, here's the academic way to do a thing, right? But some of the people who really shine the brightest in our space are the folks who feel it naturally, and they actually think deeply about, who is this person that I'm selling to? Yeah. Who is this person that I'm working with here? And what are they actually experiencing? What are the things they really want? What are they most afraid of?
I love what you're saying because this is my opinion and my experience. The best way to know something is sometimes not knowing or unlearning. So we learn all that theory about marketing and we kind of get numbed to the reality of what we are doing, which is what you just say. And even off camera before is you are very interested in the real connection. And I think that helped you to understand really what marketing is at a much deeper level beyond what we learn in school.
Yeah. I tell my team all the time, and I'd love to talk a little bit more about the growth of the group, but, we sit down sometimes and, we'll have our daily kind of stand-up meetings with the team. And I'll pull up a video like Liquid Death just came out with, have you seen the Kegs for Pregs video? It's hilarious, right?
Amazing.
I played that video last week and I sat down with the team. I said, why is this good? Why does this hit all the marks? And it was very interesting listening to their responses as we kind of went around the conference room. And we all ultimately came to this factor that there's tension, there's conflict, there's storytelling. Kegs for Pregs. It's this diametrically opposed kind of concept that works, right? Drinking alcohol, pregnant people, but you're not drinking alcohol, but it's funny, and that conflict drives interest and it drives awareness and it makes people listen and watch and they want to stay tuned. So, to a degree, there's kind of also this entertainment aspect to what we do, right?
Yeah. So, going back to the root of that, you're talking about the agency and how you interact with your team, that right now you are more than 20 people. But you started in your studio.
Under 20.
Just under 20, but you started in your studio. So for a guy that could have pretty much funded any company because you knew how to lift the money and the investment and how to grow a business, that can be applied to any business. But then why an advertising agency? And tell me about that journey. How was that moment since you said, I want to create a business, to what you are right now and what made you successful?
So the most interesting thing about studying something like private equity is you realize how accounting heavy it is. If you've ever spent time building financial models, you realize that you will spend your entire day in an Excel spreadsheet building a model that is very technical and could have errors, and there could be all kinds of issues with it. It's a very complicated thing to do. And while I felt like I was making progress in that area, and while I felt like I was generally decent at it, it was obviously not something that I was very passionate about. And so, when I started Uptown Agency, my thought process was simple because I thought to myself, I want to spend every day doing what I like to do, because life is very, very short. You don't have a lot of time. I just turned 37 and it just went by like that. And, when I started Uptown, I was 29 years old and I thought to myself, how do I live every day to where I enjoy what I do? I like what I do. That when I hit those really difficult times that every entrepreneur is going to experience, which is being like an entrepreneurship is a very difficult thing.
Yeah.
As you know,
it seems very, very sexy from the outside, but the one that is inside is hard.
Onlookers rarely see the weight that is involved in the difficulty in things of making sure accounting is correct, making sure you're hitting payroll, making sure you're bringing in new clients, making sure you're managing clients well. There's a lot that goes into that, and so it's not an easy thing to do, and so it's easier if the thing that you're doing, the task you're undertaking, is something you truly love. If you love it, and it's truly a marriage where you're sticking with it and you're committed to it, then you're going to see it through.
I think that's what you're talking about in the same territory, but in those moments, because I'm sure you have them, every entrepreneur have them, of doubt, should I go back to Chase? Should I go back to anyone to that, big paycheck every month? When you hit those lows because of whatever problem, how keep pushing you through?
I remember this one moment. We were working. Our office was in a WeWork, right, and it was right after COVID hit. The shutdowns were all happening. A large majority of our clients were event space. You know, we had just signed these deals with kind of Toyota Music Factory and all these organizations that were all about live events, and all that was just stripped away. And we had signed these deals like 2 days before the shutdowns.
Wow.
All of our revenue just dried up. And I'll never forget, I lived, you know, our office was at the WeWork at American Airlines Center, right downtown. I lived next door in a high rise, right, in a little apartment. And I'll never forget that feeling of walking to the office, feeling like everything was about to come crashing down. And I was terrified. Truly, I was terrified. And I remember telling myself, I was listening to motivational videos on YouTube, which is something I do a lot just to keep sure I'm in the right, make sure I'm in the right headspace.
Right.
I'm walking to American Airlines Center, and I remember just telling myself, you know what? I am still in the game. I am walking to my office. There are still things to be done. There are resources all around me. If I look across this city, I see logos on every building. There are clients that need help with the kind of work that we do. It is not over. I am not going to quit. And so that is a mentality I think that drives our whole group, you know. And yes, you know what? It's been really interesting as we've turned into a more mature organization, as we've seen profit and less profit, and as we've made money, and as we've, you know, grown our type of client, the type of work. You know, we acquired another group called RBA last year, Rocketberry and Associates, which is a great accretive acquisition for our group. Awesome founders, whole story there we can talk about later. But I think everyone in our group is very driven to succeed, and we care a lot about our clients. And so I think we kind of take that same energy to those projects, you know.
What does success mean to you?
Success? I think it's a lot with kind of what I was saying earlier about, you know, I think the interesting thing about an agency, right, is there's a lot of different people involved, right? You have yourself as an owner. We have 4 partners in our group that lead different groups like PR or media planning and buying or client management or design and creative, right? And I think, you know, sorry, ask the question one more time. I apologize.
So what is it? Because you say everybody there wants to be successful.
Yes.
And then success, maybe we want to have
Yes.
great clients. We want to grow to 1,000 people agency, or I want to be happy. So success is different for anybody. So what is success for you?
We want all those things. You know, I think we want our organization to be as successful as it can be from a financial perspective. We want to do work that we're excited about doing. You know, I would say every agency goes through clients that are amazing to work with, and there's clients that, you know, are not so great to work with, depending on attitudes or whatnot, right? And so you kind of take that all in stride. But, you know, we want to do well. We want to pay our people well. I think that's one of the things that's really important to us is paying above average rates for work. And I've had advisors tell me, oh, you shouldn't pay them so much. But I'm like, well, I think, you know, if we have a rising tide, it should lift all boats, because that's something that matters to me, right? You know, I want to develop these people that work for us. That makes me happy, you know. Being able to provide for my wife and my kid, my son, like that's also a part of happiness. So how do you see it?
I go by my top values, and one of my top 2 values is freedom. So for me, success is to be able to be financially stable. Meanwhile, I'm free.
Yes.
And free is free to basically to use my time in any way I want to use it. I'm here. This is not my full-time job. But I still, it's something that I enjoy. I enjoy this conversation. I enjoyed helping others to find their ways through life and business through the conversation that I have with the guest of the podcast. So that's happiness to me. And and I know that it's very different than for other people. So you could, you know, when you were telling me your background, and I sort of knew before because I kind of read about you, but you were telling me your background coming from venture capitalist. It gives me the idea that when you approach a new account and a new client, you are not thinking, your first thought is not, I want to execute my creative thinking and I want to take this to win a Cannes Lion, although you could, but it's like how I grow that business.
Right.
What is the difference between an agency that is founded by a creative graphic designer, the typical expertises that are behind founders and your agency coming from a root of venture capitalism?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of clients that meet with us the first time, they're pleasantly surprised at how we communicate with them. When you run a design shop, right, or you run a PR shop, or you run a social advertising shop or a content creation shop, a lot of these founders of these groups that are singular in their line of services, they're going into these organizations thinking, how can I sell this service, right? How can I sell this one thing I do? And I think for us, we've always tried to be, and we're always expanding to be even more and more holistic in our approach to how we work with clients. And so the mindset that we take is a little bit more VC in our approach than agency in our approach, because we're thinking about the group and we're analyzing what the products that they sell, the services they sell, the market that they're operating in, the competition that they're competing against, the way a VC would look at it. And you're looking at it from a little bit more analytical of a lens. You're trying to understand the micro and macro trends that actually move transactions, right? And you're also trying to understand what wave can we ride, almost certainly help this group improve, right, from an ROI perspective. And I think the mindset is very different. And so for us, being a little bit more full service as a boutique, which is a little bit rare for a group of our size to be full service, is, there's a lot of levers that you can pull for a client, and giving them the confidence that we're trying to understand what the actual business outcome that you're trying to achieve is. And we're not married to this tactic, but we can move any of these levers for you. I think that gives them comfort, because you can guide them and you can tell them, we're not here to do marketing planning for you. We're here to do strategy. And if you know anything, the difference between planning and strategy, strategy is we are making this choice as opposed to these other choices.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not just we're planning out activities we're going to do.
Yeah.
And so
I have
they
exactly
like that.
the same approach, because really
Yeah.
nobody cares about what you do if they don't need it.
Yeah.
So I never approach like I'm doing fractional CMO. I really like marketing, and I really like marketing from the perspective of a CMO. I started with building an agency, which still exists. My involvement is very minimal.
Yeah.
I really admire agencies. I don't have a lot of patience to deal with clients that are difficult. So I like the CMO work, because you work with the CEO.
Yeah.
And it's a whole other different level of thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's great. But then in your case, based on your expertise, you are a true CEO of your agency. So you have creative, you have designers, you have strategies, and tell me if I'm wrong, but your main work or job is to make the agency grow.
Yes, that's 100% correct. You're absolutely right in that. And I think, with our team, I like to take a first principles approach to things. I always ask myself, what is an agency actually, right? And this is like, for example, I had a client once, and he said, how can you be good at media planning and buying and creative? Because I typically see people are good at one or the other.
Right.
And I said, well, is it possible that a group can hire two principals that one is very good at media planning and buying, and one is very good at creative direction? Is that a possibility? It's like, absolutely, it's a possibility, right? And so from a first principles perspective, an agency is really just a staffing company. Right? It's a staffing agency that manages.
Perspective.
We manage projects for clients in-house. And for whatever reason, whether it's they don't want to hire, a 20-person staff to do the work, or whether they're trying to get work done that exists outside of the political atmosphere that they've created, right? That might, stunt good ideas, or whatever whatever the reasoning is. At the end of the day, we're a staffing company. My job is to find incredible talent. My job is to liberate that talent to be able to do great work by aligning them with great clients, right? And then I'm supposed to make sure that talent, while they're creating great work, understands how the work that they're doing is adding value to a client. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. And then that you get into a very interesting territory, and we're very close to finish. And I would love to invite you again because we have so much to talk. But you touch a very interesting topic, which is finding great talent. And I want to, from your perspective, you have been managing people. We have several universities around. What are those signals during an interview or a resume that tells you this is a great talent, and then how that plays after the person is hired?
Awesome question. You know, to work at an agency, a person has to have a high level of personal agency, right? You know, agencies, we do our best to train and to give people resources to become better at their skills, right? But we have to be able to find folks who are able to think critically about the work they're doing. You know, to be successful in an agency environment, you can't just be a box checker. You'll never really be successful with that type of mindset. So what I look for with talent, who has a high level of agency, who has a high level of problem solving ability where they can think about the outcome they're trying to achieve and think creatively, not just what have we done before that has worked, but do research and try to understand what are other organizations doing, what kind of content's being created that's actually moving the needle, what kind of cultural moments are out there that we can also play a participating role in that conversation. You know, people need to be able to think critically about what they're doing and adjust what they're doing. So I look for, absolutely.
Now, have you seen a pattern? Like what is the common pattern, or what is the pattern or the common traits, personality traits, skills, soft skills, hard skills that you see that is typically repeat in great talent?
You know, who was it that worked with, I think, Steve Jobs? I can't remember the guy's name. He was an executive at Apple, and he said, you want to hire the divas, right? And I'd like to take that a step further. I think divas do great work, but they got to learn how to be a little pig-headed. You know, they have to be able to produce great work, but also try to understand be empathetic towards other points of view.
Yeah.
And as you said, no trophies are given to committees.
Right, exactly.
You know, there's got to be someone who wants to jump in and lead the work and do a great job and own it.
A little bit of a rebels that defend the ideas. Right?
Yeah.
And what, on the other hand, what makes a mediocre talent?
For me, the most common characteristic of someone who is mediocre or going to perform in a mediocre way is someone who sits there and waits to be told what to do.
Okay, that's a great.
You know, so if someone is going to excel, they have to be able to sit at a conference room and try to understand what it is we're trying to accomplish, right? And then they have to leave that room and they need to go think about how they can add value to that.
So you don't believe that companies need executors?
Explain what you mean by executors.
Executors is someone that, because typically divas are rebels. They will fight for their ideas. They will fight for their point of view. Executors will do what they are told to do.
Yeah.
They are easier to manage. Divas are hard to manage.
Right.
But at the end, are you willing to pay that price to have brilliant talent? So when I say that is that executors that will have someone with that critical thinking skills, and will tell this executor do A, B, C, D, and they are great executors.
Yeah, I do think there's a role for that and a place for that. And you know, coming from the startup world, it's all about the life cycle of a business. I think as you a larger organization, there becomes a larger need for execution. Folks who are just like, hey, this is the game, the playbook, and I'm gonna make the play.
Yeah.
And I think that at our size of a group, we don't need that just yet, right? Well, we need high agency. You know what I mean?
That's a great point.
Everyone's driving forward, but I'd say, you know, when we get to 100 employees, 150 employees, I think that will probably change because, you know, now the folks who have high agency, now they're leading those lines of business, you know, and they will need executors, because obviously if you have 150 people all doing their own thing, that's
if you have 100
messy.
divas, it will be a really hard.
It's going to be problem. Yeah,
to
it's going to be tough.
So Joseph, to
Yeah.
close, unfortunately, the time flies when we're here. But to close, what is the harder thing of entrepreneurship, and will you trade that again for stability, or you still love what you do despite the challenges?
Yeah, for me, the hardest part of entrepreneurship is understanding as a leader which problem you need to solve right now. You know what I mean? So really as an entrepreneur, you're just in this game of problem prioritization. There's always issues, right? Whether it's in the execution of work or client management or finance or payroll or any of these things that are really important. It's all about understanding what is the highest priority. And so what I try to do is I like the way I think someone who worked for Elon Musk said that every week he just goes to one of his businesses and he basically says, what's the biggest problem that needs to be solved? He sits down with the folks and he solves that and he moves on to the next problem. And so I think trying to be a little less ADHD in an entrepreneur's approach is really, really important. You can't solve all problems all the time, but you can solve the most important problem. And I think if you do that and you have a lot of focus and you execute, you solve that issue, you move on to the next thing, whatever it is, then you'll be okay.
So you will say that the quality that is, nothing guarantees success, but the ones that get you closer is that focus on solving the problem.
Yeah. The highest problem.
The highest problem at any given time, right? Because it varies. That's such a valuable advice. Yeah. I'm gonna take it myself.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And again, the door is open anytime that you want to come. Yeah. We can have actually this is a formal invitation to have a series of specific topics and just talk about it and then and share that knowledge with the world. That's another one of my passion is just share the knowledge with all of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Iman. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.